She said it in front of 43 people. I know it was 43 because I counted them later, standing in the parking garage of the Marriott on East Colfax, hands on the roof of my car, trying to understand what had just happened to me. 43 people. Friends, co-workers, her sister, her mother. People who had eaten food I paid for, who were drinking wine I had carried up from the cellar myself that morning. People who smiled at me all night while I refilled their glasses and moved chairs and fixed the Bluetooth speaker when it cut out. And then the photographer said, "Okay, everyone together," and Delia looked directly at me. Not the way a wife looks at a husband, but the way someone looks at something that doesn't belong in the room. And she said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "Callum, can you move out of the picture? Your face is kind of ruining the aesthetic." There was a half-second of silence, the kind that has weight to it. Then someone laughed nervously. Then someone else said AW like it was a joke, and Delia turned back toward the camera with her birthday smile, and the photographer said ready, and the flash fired. I stepped out of the frame. And then I kept walking. Through the sliding glass doors, past the valet stand, across the parking lot, all the way to my car. I didn't grab my jacket. I didn't say goodbye to anyone. I didn't look back to see if she noticed I was gone. I got in, started the engine, and drove north on I-25 in the dark with no destination. Just the need to be somewhere she wasn't. My name is Callum Hart. I'm 38 years old. I'm an independent financial consultant based in Denver, Colorado. And that night, the night of my wife's 36th birthday party, was the night I finally understood that I had been disappearing long before I walked out of that photo. If you've ever felt invisible in your own relationship, this story is for you. Subscribe, like this video, and tell me in the comments, when did you realize you were giving more than you were getting? What I'm about to share changed the way I saw myself, and everything else. Let me take you back to the beginning. Not the dramatic beginning, the quiet one, because that's where it always starts. I met Delia Marsh at a rooftop fundraiser in Lodo, the lower downtown neighborhood of Denver, about 6 years before all of this. She was wearing a yellow dress in October, which sounds like a detail that doesn't matter, but it told me something. It told me she wasn't afraid to be noticed. She worked in brand marketing for a mid-sized tech company in Cherry Creek, and she spoke the way people speak when they've already decided they're interesting. Fast, confident, with eye contact that felt like a dare. I was immediately overwhelmed by her. I don't say that as a compliment to her or a criticism of myself. It's just true. I'd spent most of my 20s building a consulting practice and not much else. Delia made me feel like I had been living in black and white, and she was the first color thing I'd ever touched. We dated for 14 months and got married at the Boetcher Mansion in Morrison, out on the ridge overlooking the foothills. My mother cried. My brother made a toast that was too long. Delia looked at me that day like I was exactly where she wanted me to be. The first 3 years were good. Not perfect, no marriage is, but genuinely good. We bought a house in Washington Park. I grew my client base. She got promoted twice. We took a trip to Portugal for our second anniversary and argued the whole flight home about whose fault it was that we'd missed a restaurant reservation in Lisbon. And even that argument felt like something two people who belong together do. Normal friction. Normal life. But somewhere in the 4th year, something shifted. I noticed it first in small moments. The way she'd answer a question I asked with a sigh that said, "Do we have to talk about this?" The way she started referring to her social plans as my plans instead of ours, even when she'd planned things that technically involved me. The way she stopped asking about my work, not because she was distracted, but because she seemed genuinely uninterested in what I did with most of my waking hours. I told myself it was a season. I told myself every marriage has these stretches where you're both just surviving. I told myself the right things for a man who wants to believe his marriage is fine. But the truth was simpler and harder. Delia had stopped seeing me. Not all at once. It wasn't like a light switching off. It was more like the way a city neighborhood changes. Gradually, almost imperceptibly. And then one day, you walk down a street you used to love and realize you don't recognize it anymore. She built a social world in those years that I was technically part of but never really welcome in. Friends from her new company, a group that socialized heavily, brunches in Capitol Hill on weekends, evening events in Rhino, a spin-class tribe that seemed to operate as its own sovereign nation. I was Delia's husband. That was my character. Quiet, reliable, slightly invisible. The man who handled logistics. I paid the mortgage on the Washington Park house. I handled our taxes, our insurance, our investments. When her car needed new tires, I made the appointment. When her parents came to visit from Phoenix, I cleaned the whole house and cooked dinner both nights. I was, by any external measure, a husband doing his job. But I had begun to understand something about Delia that I hadn't let myself admit. My usefulness was not the same thing as my value. She appreciated what I did. She did not particularly appreciate me. The birthday party was her idea, obviously. She wanted it at the Marriott's event space downtown, which costs what it costs, and I didn't argue. I wanted her to have a good night. I spent weeks handling the coordination. Catering, decorations, the playlist she'd spent 2 hours curating and then changed completely 3 days before the event. Her friend group, maybe 30 people plus family. My job that night was to be present and pleasant and make sure everything ran smoothly, which is a job I've gotten very good at in my marriage. I remember standing near the bar about an hour into the party, watching Delia move through the room. She was good at rooms. She laughed at the right moments, touched people's arms when she made points, tilted her head when someone else was speaking to signal, "I see you, I'm listening." She was magnetic in that specific way that makes everyone feel chosen just for being near her. And I watched her and thought, she's performing tonight. Not for me, not because of me. I am the stage manager. I've been the stage manager for years. That's when her friend Prue, who worked with her at the company, came and stood next to me. Prue was one of the few people in Delia's circle who treated me like a full human being. She'd hand me a drink unprompted, ask about my work with actual curiosity, remember things I'd mentioned months ago. "You okay?" Prue asked. "Sure," I said. "You?" She looked at me the way people look at someone they're a little worried about. "You seem far away." "Just tired," I said. "It's been a busy week." She nodded, but she kept looking at me, and I had the uncomfortable feeling she saw something I wasn't ready to say out loud. An hour later came the photo. The photographer Delia had hired, real photographer, proper equipment, not someone with an iPhone, gathered everyone near the far wall of the ballroom. White brick backdrop, warm string lights, a setup that would look beautiful in pictures. I moved to stand beside Delia. That's where a husband stands, beside his wife. And she looked at me, and she said it. "Callum, can you move out of the picture? Your face is kind of ruining the aesthetic." She said it lightly. She said it the way people say things when they've decided the cruelty is justified by the casual delivery. Like if you don't yell, it doesn't count. Like if you're smiling while you say it, it's not a wound. I felt something happen in my chest that I still don't have the exact word for. Not anger, not humiliation, though both of those were there. It was more like recognition. Like my body already knew this was the truth of my marriage, and hearing it said out loud was just the last piece of confirmation arriving. I stepped out of frame, and I kept walking. I drove north without thinking. Past the Pepsi Center, past the Mousetrap Interchange, out past Commerce City, where the refineries lit up orange against the dark sky. I ended up at a gas station in Thornton, sitting in my car in the parking lot for probably 40 minutes, not doing anything, just letting the engine run. Here is what I didn't do. I didn't call anyone. I didn't scroll through my phone looking for someone to tell me I was right. I didn't draft a text to Delia explaining what I was feeling, or asking her to account for what she'd said. I'd spent years as the person who processed things internally and then returned to the situation improved and smoothed over, the emotional equivalent of the guy who fixes the drywall before the in-laws arrive. I was not doing that tonight. Tonight I was just going to sit in a gas station parking lot in Thornton and let it be what it was. What it was, a public humiliation by the person who was supposed to be my partner, delivered in front of everyone who mattered to her, in a place I had arranged and paid for because I believed that was what love required of me. What it also was, the first moment in years when I wasn't managing how I appeared. My phone was going. Not Delia, at least not at first. It was her friend Prue, who texted, "Where did you go? Everything okay?" Then another number, someone named Becca, a woman from Delia's spin class I'd met twice. Her text said, "She's still crying. No context, no further explanation." I stared at that message for a long time. She's still crying. My wife, who had just told 43 people I was ruining her birthday photo by existing in it, was crying, and someone in her friend group felt it necessary to inform me of this, apparently expecting me to come back and comfort her. I thought about what that said about the expectations people had of me, that I would absorb what had happened, drive back, walk back in, and find a way to make her feel better about the moment she'd humiliated me. That's what the reliable, quiet, logistical husband does. That's the character I had agreed to play. I put my phone in the glove compartment. Started driving again. This time south, not back to Denver, but down toward Castle Rock. The lights of the suburbs fading as I got onto the stretch of I-25, where it opens up and the sky gets wider and the mountains are a black shape to the west against a slightly lighter darkness. I thought about Delia in yellow at that fundraiser in Lodo. I thought about the Boetcher mansion and my mother crying and my brother's long toast. I thought about Portugal and the stupid restaurant argument. I thought about all the dinners I'd cooked for her parents and all the tires I'd scheduled and all the logistics I'd handled that nobody ever noticed. Because that's what invisible people do. They make things work so smoothly that nobody needs to notice them. I thought about myself at 28, early in the consultancy, working 14-hour days and believing that if I built something real, I would deserve a real life. I thought about myself at 38, a man whose wife had just told him to move out of her birthday photo because his face was ruining the aesthetic, and I thought, when did I decide that was okay? Because it hadn't happened all at once. Nobody wakes up one morning and discovers their marriage is a diminishment. It's a long series of small adjustments, each one reasonable on its own, until you look up one day and realize you've adjusted yourself almost entirely out of the picture. I had stopped offering opinions about social plans because she preferred making them herself. I had stopped talking about my work because she seemed bored by it. I had stopped suggesting we take trips together because she took trips with her friends and seemed to enjoy those more. I had built a version of myself inside this marriage that was useful, functional, quiet, and almost completely invisible. And on the night of her birthday party, in front of 43 people, she'd acknowledged that fact the only way it was actually honest to acknowledge it. She'd pointed at me and said, "You are not part of this picture." I didn't go home that night. I drove to my brother Jonah's house in Lakewood. He's a high school geography teacher, married to a woman named Renata who works in hospital administration. They have 2 kids, a golden retriever, and a finished basement with a pull-out couch that I would have slept on in humiliation 6 months earlier, but which that night felt like the most honest shelter available to me. Jonah opened the door in his bathrobe at 12:30 in the morning. He looked at me and he didn't ask a lot of questions. That's one of the things I've always loved about him. He made coffee. We sat at the kitchen island. I told him what happened. He was quiet for a moment when I finished. Then he said, "What are you going to do, not Kia?" Are you sure that's what she meant? Not maybe she was just stressed. Not any of the things people say when they need you to make the problem smaller so they don't have to sit with its actual size. Just, what are you going to do? And I realized I didn't know yet. But I knew one thing clearly. I was not going back to who I had been the day before. I slept on Jonah's pull-out couch. In the morning, Renata made eggs and didn't ask me anything, which was its own form of kindness. Their older kid, a 9-year-old named Felix, sat across from me at the breakfast table and told me at length about a documentary he'd watched about volcanic islands, completely unbothered by the obvious adult crisis happening around him. I listened to every word. It was the best conversation I'd had in weeks. Delia called 14 times before 9 in the morning. I didn't answer any of them. She texted, "Where are you? I'm scared. Please come home." She texted, "I know what I said was wrong. Can we please talk?" She texted, "You're not being fair. This is a huge overreaction." I noticed that she moved from "I'm scared" to "I know I was wrong" to "You're overreacting" in the span of 11 minutes. That told me something. That told me she was moving through positions, testing which one would bring me back, rather than sitting in the reality of what she'd done. I texted Prue, not Delia. I asked her to let Delia know I was safe and staying with family. Prue texted back within seconds. "Okay. For what it's worth, what she said was awful. I'm sorry you had to hear that. I appreciated that. I told her so." Then I put my phone away and sat in Jonah's backyard with a second cup of coffee and the golden retriever, whose name was apparently Governor, and I made a list. Not a dramatic list. Not a list about leaving or staying or who got what in a divorce. Just a list of things that were true. Facts about my life that I was going to stop pretending weren't true. Fact. I had not felt genuinely seen by my wife in at least 2 years. Fact. I had organized my personality around her preferences to such a degree that I would not have been able to tell you with confidence what I actually enjoyed doing. Fact. I had paid for a birthday party where I was told my face ruined the photo, and I had spent weeks looking forward to making it perfect for her. Fact. I was good at my job. I was good at being a husband. in all the practical ways. I had not done anything to deserve being invisible. Fact, I did not know what I wanted my life to look like, but I knew it couldn't look like that anymore. Governor put his head in my lap. I scratched behind his ears. He seemed genuinely pleased by this. It felt like the most uncomplicated relationship I'd been in for years. I went home 2 days later. Delia was in the living room when I walked in. She'd clearly been waiting. She stood up immediately when she heard my key in the lock, and she looked at me with an expression I recognized, the one she had when she knew she'd gone too far and had spent time calculating the optimal way to walk it back. "Callum," she said, "I am so sorry. What I said was unacceptable. I don't know why I said it. I think I was just stressed about the party and I took it out on you, and that was wrong. This is technically an apology. But I had learned enough about Delia over 6 years to understand the difference between an apology and a reinstatement request. This was the latter. She wasn't asking me to forgive what she'd done. She was asking me to restore the arrangement, to go back to being the quiet, useful, invisible husband so her life could proceed as designed. I sat down across from her. I didn't hug her. I didn't tell her it was okay. I said, "Tell me honestly, when did you stop seeing me?" She blinked. That wasn't the script she'd prepared for. "What do you mean?" "I mean," I said, "that I don't think what happened at the party was an accident. I think it was an honest moment. I think you looked at me and you saw someone who was in your way, someone whose face didn't fit the picture you were making of your life. And I think you felt that way for a while. I need to know when it started." There was a long silence. To her credit, she didn't immediately deny it. She sat down across from me and she looked at the coffee table and she didn't say anything for almost a full minute. And then she said very quietly, "I don't know. I think I started to feel like we were different people and I didn't know how to tell you that." "Different how?" "You're so steady," she said. "You're so consistent. You never need anything from me. And I kept waiting to feel, I don't know, important to you. Like you couldn't do it without me. But you could. You obviously could. You have everything handled all the time, and I feel like an accessory to your competence." I looked at her. I looked at this woman who had been treated as the center of gravity in our marriage for 6 years, and who had, somehow, managed to feel like she was orbiting something instead. "You felt like an accessory," I repeated. "I know how that sounds." "You were the aesthetic," I said slowly. "I was ruining it." She flinched. "That's not—" "It is, though," I said. "Not angry, just accurate. You said it because some part of you meant it. And I think we both need to stop pretending that the way we've been living is sustainable. Because I have been disappearing for years, Delia. I stopped talking about my work. I stopped suggesting things. I stopped taking up space because I could tell you needed me to be smaller. And that's partly on me, but not entirely." She started crying then. Real tears, not the performance of tears. And I felt something I didn't expect to feel. Compassion. Not the caving kind. Not the kind that sends you rushing across the room to make it stop. Just genuine compassion for a woman who had done something cruel because she herself was lost. But compassion is not the same thing as returning to a life that was making me invisible. Here is the part I want to be careful about, because I think it's the part that gets skipped in stories like this, the part that gets edited out in favor of the cleaner narrative where the wronged person walks out and never looks back, and the credits roll on their improved life. We tried counseling. I want to be honest about that because I think it matters. We found a therapist named Dr. Tricia Weil, who had an office on South University Boulevard in Denver, 3rd floor, with a view of a parking lot that somehow felt very appropriate for conversations about things that aren't working. We went for 8 weeks together, and 4 weeks more individually, and we were both honest in ways we hadn't been in years, and it helped clarify things even when it couldn't fix them. What came out of it, slowly and painfully, was this. Delia had married a version of me she thought she could shape into a kind of ambient presence in her life. Supportive, capable, reliably there, but ultimately background. And I had let her do that because I'd convinced myself that keeping her comfortable was the same thing as being loved. We had both been wrong about what we were doing together. She was not a villain. I want to say that clearly. The thing about being gradually erased by someone is that it rarely comes from malice. It comes from a failure of imagination. She couldn't imagine that I had an interior life that mattered, not because she's a bad person, but because I had never insisted on it. By the time Dr. Weil asked us in our final joint session to describe what a good future looked like for each of us, the honesty of our separate answers told us everything we needed to know. Delia's answer was about her social world, her career trajectory, a vision of her life that was vivid and detailed, and included a partner but didn't particularly require this specific one. My answer was about rebuilding, finding out what I actually wanted, taking up space again. Those are not answers that point toward the same place. The decision to end the marriage was not made in a single conversation. It was made across 4 weeks of sessions with Dr. Weil, in the silences between what we said to each other, in the moments when I would look at Delia across the coffee table in her office and feel neither anger nor love, but something closer to the specific sadness of recognizing a door that had already been closed for a long time. I had one conversation with my father about it, early December, at his house in Fort Collins. He'd been married to my mother for 39 years, which I've always thought of as a kind of miracle of sustained choice, and I wanted to hear what he thought without wanting him to tell me what to do. He listened to everything I said, then he said, "A marriage is two people deciding every day to see each other. What you're telling me is that she stopped deciding that, and somewhere in trying to make it easier for her, so did you." I didn't say anything. "The question," he said, "is whether you both want to start deciding again. Not whether you can get past what happened at the party, whether you actually want to be in each other's picture." That word, picture. I drove back to Denver on I-25 in the early evening, the Front Range lit pink and orange to my left, and I knew the answer. We filed in November. The house sold in February. It sold for $115,000 more than we paid for it, which is one of those facts about Denver real estate that feels surreal unless you've been in this market for a while. We divided everything civilly. There were no explosions. Jonah said the whole thing had the energy of two reasonable people acknowledging a mistake, which was both accurate and slightly devastating. I moved into an apartment in the Highlands neighborhood, north of downtown, with a small balcony facing west toward the mountains. I got into the habit of eating breakfast on that balcony every morning, just coffee and whatever I'd put together, watching the light change on the Front Range. It sounds small. It was not small. It was the first 30 minutes of every day that belonged entirely to me. I started talking to my clients differently, more directly. Less of the self-effacing whatever works for you energy I developed as a defense mechanism against Delia's need to be the most interesting person in any conversation. I took up more space in meetings. I said I think you should consider this differently, instead of one option might be. My business got better. My clients got better outcomes. The version of me that had been managing itself to be tolerable was, it turned out, also a worse consultant. Prue and I stayed in touch. She texted me a few weeks after everything fell apart to say she wanted me to know that what happened at the party had bothered her, and she was glad I'd stood up for myself even if it hadn't looked like that from the outside. We've had coffee twice. She's a genuinely good person, and I'm grateful she was in that room. Jonah and Renata had me over for dinner every couple of weeks for the first few months, which I suspect was coordinated care that I chose not to acknowledge so they could keep doing it. Governor the Golden Retriever remained enthusiastically pleased to see me every time. About 4 months after the divorce was finalized, I was wrapping up a late evening working through a client's retirement portfolio when I got a LinkedIn message from a woman named Simone Grady, who worked in urban planning for the city of Denver. She was reaching out because a mutual contact had mentioned my firm. Professional, appropriate, brief. I responded professionally and appropriately. But I also noticed that I had responded at all, which the previous version of me, the one who had spent years contracting himself to fit inside someone else's vision, would have hesitated to do. The man who had been told his face ruined the picture would have found 17 quiet reasons to wait, to second guess, to stay small. I didn't do that anymore. Simone and I met for coffee at a place on 32nd Avenue that had good natural light and too many plants and excellent espresso. We talked for 2 hours about urban infrastructure, which is not a topic I had ever previously found compelling, and about what I did and why I'd decided to do it independently, and about Denver and what it was becoming and what got lost in the becoming. I told her at one point, because it seemed relevant to something we'd been discussing, that I'd gone through a divorce the previous year. She nodded. She said, "Was it hard?" I said, "It was clarifying." She looked at me with the particular expression of someone who has also been clarified by something difficult. And she said, "Yeah, that's the right word for it." I'm recording this not because the story has a neat ending. It doesn't. Life doesn't produce neat endings. It produces turning points, and what matters is what you do with them. The turning point for me was a birthday party. It was 43 people and a flash going off and a wife looking at me like I was something in the way of the picture she was building of her life. It was me walking out of the frame and this time not walking back in the same way. What I know now that I didn't know before. Invisible is not the same thing as comfortable. I thought. I was making peace. I was making myself disappear. A person who wants you in the picture will tell you so. You don't have to earn your place in a frame built for two. The moment someone tells you that you are an inconvenience to your own life is not the moment to apologize. It is the moment to start asking yourself how you got there. And this, it is never too late to decide you take up space. 38 years old, standing in the parking garage of a Marriott on East Colfax in Denver, Colorado, hands on the roof of my car, I decided that. It was not elegant. It was not comfortable. It was just true. Delia is living in a condo in Cherry Creek. I hear things occasionally through the mutual orbit of shared social geography that is impossible to entirely escape in a city Denver's size. She seems fine. I genuinely hope she is. I am sitting on my balcony in the Highlands with my coffee and the mountains to the west, and I am more present in my own life than I have been in years. That is not a small thing. It's actually the whole thing. You know what hit me hardest about Callum's story? It wasn't the party. It wasn't even what she said. It was the fact that he'd been shrinking himself for years and calling it love. And I think a lot of us do that. We confuse keeping the peace with keeping the relationship. They're not the same thing. The moment you start editing yourself to fit someone else's comfort, you're not in a relationship anymore. You're in a performance. And performances end. So if you're watching this and something in that story felt a little too familiar, drop it in the comments. I read every single one, and if you're not subscribed yet, what are you waiting for? Hit the button. I'll see you in the next one.